Welcome to Tune In with Michigan's Public Safety Communication System, or the MPSCS. I'm Brad Stoddard, Director of the Office of Michigan's Public Safety Communication System. For 30 years, MPSCS has provided a stable, secure framework for interoperable communications across Michigan's local, state, federal, tribal, and private first responder communities. It's a mission we're proud to uphold, and this year we're celebrating a major milestone, 30-year anniversary for the MPSCS. That's quite an accomplishment. Back on September 14th, 1995, Michigan broke ground just north of here on one of the first statewide systems utilizing the Project 25 standard, started right here in Michigan. This effort launched primarily Southeast Michigan all the way to the Lansing area. This moment marked the beginning of a new era in public safety communications, not only for Michigan, but across the country. To help us reflect on the journey from those early days to where we are now and where we're heading, I'm thrilled to welcome two of the MPSCS pioneers that were the champions in the first days of this system. Some of it even predated the system in itself. First, we have, to my left, Mr. Jeff Steffel, retired trooper, captain, and commanding officer of the communications system, leading the early efforts from the public safety side, the government side of the MPSCS. He was around initially contracted and constructed in those early days. And to my right, Mr. Chuck Cousino. He was named Motorola's project director with the award on the original contract. I'm sure he had plenty of other titles during that period of time, but we always looked at Chuck as the lead for Motorola. I'm sure it was probably senior director, senior guy in charge for Michigan, or anything else that we may have heard on our side. I just know I learned from my boss at the time was the level of respect from both of you gentlemen I still have today. So gentlemen, it's great to have you both here with us today. So before we get into the MPSCS story, let's give folks a chance to get to know you both a little bit better. We had the opportunity to have both of you here a few years ago. Unfortunately, it was prior to COVID, and it really kind of kiboshed some of our efforts that we had planned for our 25th anniversary. So we put that on hiatus, and we're bringing it back for the 30th. So as those would know, the 25th is a silver anniversary, and the 30th is pearl. So appropriate that both of you have spent some time in the oysters through the years, and now you are a seasoned pearl sitting in front of us and everyone else that's listening, all of you. So let's provide just a little bit of background for our listeners and those watching. Where are you from? Give us an idea, hobbies, what you've been up to since you retired from MSP, and just a little bit about your career. Jeff, we'll start with you.
Well, I'll see if I can give you some pearls of wisdom. I grew up in Michigan. I went to a small town, Bangor High School. I went to Michigan State, 7 years in the state police. I did 3 years of law school, graduated from Coley. In total, I had 27 years with the agency. When I left, I went to Grand Valley as a associate professor. In the last 6.5 years, I've been on Michigan's Public Service Commission, appointed by a gubernatorial appointment. And I'm just a regular guy. I enjoy golf. I see Chuck quite a bit in the winter. We spend some time with the ladies, Cindy and Mary. And I'm just kind of a regular guy. And that's it. I've got 3 grandkids. They're all successful. Chemistry teacher. One just graduated electrical engineering with a 3.9. Texas Instruments snapped him up, and the third one just took his MCATs. He's got a 3.98 too. So I'm proud of the family. I'm just kind of a family guy. That's it.
Just a regular guy.
Just a regular guy, believe me, and a horrible golfer.
Yeah, well, I would challenge the regular guy from all the memories I had. A phenomenal leader is what I would have added in there as well. So Chuck, now we'll start with you. A little bit about your background.
I grew up in a small town just north of Toledo, Erie, Michigan. Jeff's first post.
My first post.
Rookie. Went to school in Monroe, graduated from Michigan State. I spent 7 years teaching mathematics in high school and coaching for a while. And then I ended up going to work for Motorola, had a number of jobs, got transferred to Cleveland, then got transferred to Schaumburg, and then this job came up, and got called in one day, said, hey, we have an opportunity for you, and they explained what all they wanted to do. They were starting a new concept of course, this was a huge project even for Motorola. It was a very big, high visibility project. As Jeff said earlier, before we started taping, there was a little bit of vaporware involved in the front end. So the first phase was a proof of concept, kind of a phase for it. So that went on. They wanted to put one person in charge who would be responsible for everything, so that if there was a problem, specifically if there was a problem, they knew who to go to. So I accepted. And then I had to come here, and Jeff had to approve. Jeff and your team had to approve the appointment, because the first person they had talked about putting in there was not an acceptable candidate as far as they were concerned. So I had to go through an approval process. And then the rest of it is kind of somewhat history. Went to negotiations. We'll talk about the relationships as we go on. The other things I got after I left, we completed this job. I went to work still with Motorola and worked on a couple of large federal projects, communication as a program director for those. I'm married. We have 2 children. One's in Louisville, Kentucky, works for Hussing Mechanical, and is the president of that company, and our daughter is in Charleston, South Carolina, and she's an attorney. And they both have families and spouses, significant others.
Well, so both gentlemen, all of your children and grandkids, I'm sure proud of just normal gentlemen and grandfathers. But I would share if they have the opportunity to listen to us, as well as, again, you guys were both phenomenal leaders, that no doubt that leadership that we saw in the work environment was the type of leaders that you guys had as fathers and grandparents today. So we learned probably the same way that your kids and grandkids did. There was the look and a firm voice, and you knew what that meant after that. So thank you both for a little bit of the personal background. Not a lot of times that we have these opportunities where everyone gets the chance to see the man outside of the profession, if you will, or the person outside of the profession. So we appreciate you sharing that. Let's rewind the clock just a little bit. Let's go back to the early 90s when both of you were involved in this initiative. I know, Jeff, as you shared, you had a prior job before coming into this, and it was one that was lucrative and I'd say somewhat fun from what you shared. And this was a different challenge. It was a different opportunity, but I'm guessing, no doubt, the leadership within MSP at the time believed that you were the right man for the job. And I would say from the time I've been in this role, looking back, no doubt you were the right man for the job from some of those. But I know some of those stories, but I'm sure our listeners don't know. So what was the vision of the MPSCS in the early days from both of you, your perspectives from the MSP side as well as Motorola's side?
Well, since we did the RFP, I'll start out.
Yeah.
When I was working on narcotics enforcement, I had the whole state of Michigan, and I was enjoying my job. And one of the deputy directors called me in and said, "We want you to do this radio project. We can't get it going." And I said, "Well, what have they done?" I mean, I knew it was on the table. And they gave me an RFP to read. And I said, "Well, I got to get away from the office." So I went out to Training Academy. I started reading this. I started doing my own spreadsheets. And I said, this is involved. Everything was an inviolate requirement. Everything would kick you guys off of doing this for me. And I realized that this is going to get crazy. And then they made the section a division, and I got promoted with it. And we were able to get a hold of a quality assurance contractor And then we had 2 bids, and then we went to work on the bids. And Chuck can tell you what happened with the bids and how that all went out.
Even before I wasn't involved in the preparing the proposal. I was in my other role at Schaumburg at the time, but one of the people who was intimately involved, who's since passed away, Tom Garrison, from a Motorola standpoint, was actively involved, and Motorola had a huge team that it was before Thanksgiving, right? When the RFP came out.
It was in the fall.
In the fall.
Yeah.
And it had to be in around, I think they worked through Thanksgiving. I think it had to be in early December, I think was probably the date that the RFP was due. And so Motorola had a huge team that was working, putting this proposal together. And they worked, I would say around the clock, but pretty much around the clock. And the requirements of the RFP, I knew, would require us to supply a solution that at the moment we didn't have. It wasn't developed yet. And so there was a lot of requirements that were in the proposal that ended up being requirements in our solution that we would release down the road. And in fact, the strategy was we released a solution even in the proposal for phase 1 because there was a requirement you had to make phase 1 work or else there was no phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So that was the proof of concept kind of thing. So on the front end, we went into it knowing that we would have to have a solution that would meet the requirements, even if it wasn't the long-term solution. So when we put the proposal together, it included, from our standpoint, understanding that we were going to have to go back and, assuming phase 2 was successful, when we thought it would be, upgrade phase 1, and then take that release and use it for phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So that was kind of the process. I didn't become actively involved. I asked Tom Garrison, who was one day when he was in my office, I said, well, you're going to run this thing when it's done? He said, no, absolutely not. He said, no. So the proposal got submitted. I don't know well, we can go into what all transpired, but it was in following April that we found out that we were the successful bidder, according to the state.
Well, yeah, we had, not only did you not have a solution, nobody had a solution.
Yeah.
There were no solutions out there. And Harry Warner was very instrumental in putting out that first RFP. We put out a revised RFP, and then after the team looked at the bids, the big thing was we disqualified one of the vendors. There were 2 vendors, and I'm not going to name names, but I came into the office one Monday after looking at stuff, and I said to the head negotiator or evaluator from B&B, I said, I'm not dealing with the other vendor. He says, you're going to disqualify it? I says, yeah. And he says, you know what that means? I says, I don't care what it means. It means I'm not dealing with those people. And the biggest thing was you guys proposed 187 towers. This other vendor proposed 100. It wasn't good, and they wouldn't do our testing system. Right. And the only thing I was going to have was going to be contract changes, and it was going to be horrible. And so I decided not to do that. Then they had a hearing downtown, and 2 of the legislators who were doing the hearing said, you're going to get beat up, but don't worry about it, because nothing's going to happen. It's all for show. And that's what it was. It was a 2-hour hearing down at Capitol. And then these guys were awarded, they were the winning vendor. And then we had the real contract negotiations. And I think that, if I remember correctly, our contract was 356 pages. Is that
that sounds
about right?
Well, it's definitely a 3-inch or 4-inch ring binder.
Yeah. But there was 16 pages of terms and contracts. And Chuck and I and our teams sat through 9 months. 9 months it took us to negotiate those 16 pages, and every sentence was heavy. It had meetings, and the ISACs fund, and we had a problem because if we built all standalone towers, we would take up all the money. But if we did guy towers, there was money left over. Where's it going to go?
Yeah.
And so we put that in. I don't think anybody, but you and I really knew it was a contract, because there's nobody in state government that had a clue exactly what we were doing. We weren't screwing anyone. Yeah. I just wanted to get what I wanted.
Sure.
And I wanted him to get paid for what he was doing.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's just how it went. But there was some real tough times, downstairs, downtown rather. The NIMBY issue was really big, and we couldn't just go in and get these 500-foot towers. So I proposed, I wrote the language for a statute that would be Public Act 95 of 95, I believe, that allow us to site towers 500 foot tall, or vendors would have to give us an alternative site. And that ended up being 7 lawsuits.
But that didn't happen until after we lost a lawsuit.
Where?
Before we got that legislation that said the towers.
Oh yeah. We had a problem that really came to the front.
We lost the lawsuit, and I remember meeting in our office. Randall was there, you were there, and we said, if we can't get legislation passed, this project is dead in the water. It's not going to be done at all. And that's when.
Yeah. And that day, that legislation, the last day of the session in December, Mike Ranville, God bless his soul, he just died here about a month ago. He and I called the governor's, I got hold of the governor's office to the director, and I said, you want this bill or not? And they said, well, do what you got to do. Mike got, they had Hilda Guns and Curtis were the speakers of the House, got them out into the lobby. It was pure lobbies. People were yelling and screaming and trying to get to us. And we said, we got to have this. And everyone agreed, and it went through in the last hour. It did not go through committee because we had detractors that could care less if the state police paid $187 million for the system. So it was really and we had a lot of precarious positions throughout this whole project. We just kept grinding.
That was the key one. That was the first key one. Like I said, we met and said, project's dead if we don't get some legislation that makes this thing exempt from local zoning.
I think those are the examples, again, the stories that I know, but the listeners that aren't aware of. And I know in comparison to some other states, some of the other states that they're trying to do the same thing, that's exactly what they're running into today, is buying tower, land essentially, then putting towers because no one wants one in their backyard, or the state policies or processes are just dragging these things out. Recall from a recent podcast we did with Theron Cheney and Bob Batis. They shared, which I'm sure both of you gentlemen were involved in that as well, is how they worked with, I think it was the State Bureau of Construction, and was able to develop a standard that we could use across the entire state instead of having to do one at every time.
Yeah, that got the designs got approved on the front end for the different towers and different buildings and layouts, so you didn't have to do every site independently.
Yeah, and there was also it's very interesting. The federal government wanted us to do a study on nocturnal birds, and I don't know what you guys remember of that. The problem was,
I remember it vividly.
It had to be over 5 years, which put us beyond the expiration of all our licenses for the frequencies. And so I ended up going to the feds, and I said that, I explained the situations with them, and I said, we haven't seen any dead birds by any of our current towers. I don't know. So the guy agreed we didn't have to have a study. I went back to the office and I wrote a letter memorializing that, and I sent it to him. I retired. And 3 years later, the feds were going to sue us. Were you a part of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were going to sue us on that. And I had Mary Sue Raycraft pulled that letter. And we said, well, what do you want us to do? We got approval.
Yeah.
And you know, everything we did the whole way through, we had to make sure that it was capped and capsulized, and we could show that we did our due diligence almost on everything. So, I'm looking at my notes from Livingston County issues. I'm looking at money issues. We had, what we didn't have in the bid, if you remember, is we had no monies for the new equipment necessary to service the system.
Yeah.
Well, I took care of that. I'm not going to tell you how, but we took care of that too. It was just it was, looking back, it was so much fun in so many ways. And, the people were all enthusiastic about it. I know the people in the field all wore the same shirts, whether they're Motorola guys or our guys. And it was really a wonderful project in many, many ways.
It's the passion that you definitely just focused on is still the same passion that's out there today. And in the early days when the system was under the state police, it was a different kind of collaboration we had even with state police then than what we have today. Even the knowledge within the agency, the support that you shared that you had around some of the statutory changes, from the director. I think those are the challenges that we've run into in the past, as well as trying to get some of the leaders within, whether it be a single agency or other agencies, to understand the importance of this statewide system. And we've been around, this year will be 30 years, but I know I've been dealing with these challenges for the past 17 plus years. So it was not the same challenges you gentlemen faced, but they were similar. Trying to educate those that don't know anything about it, why this is important. And I know one of the analogies we've used in the past is, the MPSCS was very much like the Mackinac Bridge. The Mackinac Bridge connected two peninsulas. But what you two gentlemen did with the vision was connected all 83 counties. And that itself, as the Mackinac Bridge took a number of years and a couple of tries to get it done. Same was true with the MPSCS. Did a phase one, and I came in with phase 1R. So I know what it was like. You had a reboot. And then from that model on, it created a foundation that not only first responders in our state, and the current count for us today is over 2,600 agencies that utilize the system, over 156,000 radios. So you go back to the early days when it was just the state police, and I think then it was maybe 8,000 radios. I think it was original.
We had I think it was 2,400 radios for the state police. We had projected throughout state government maybe 66,000.
Okay.
If everyone jumped on.
Sure.
But we didn't know what the feds wanted. I'm sure you guys service the FBI and maybe all those people because they all have the same needs. And why would they have anything other than that?
In that model that you guys created, build once, and partner. I know it was after you had retired, Jeff. But I think Chuck, pretty sure you were still around at the time. Yep. Senator Cropsey, had this idea that the system needed to be, marketed or available to all public safety. I think the term was law enforcement, but we just generalized it as all public safety across the state. And I think the irony in that is I remember it as a young engineer hearing from you of, all law enforcement will be utilizing the system. So as you work on this system, this is for all law enforcement. It was never, I think, envisioned to be just one single agency whatsoever.
No.
But that was the catalyst that really opened the door around support from the state side around now the statewide system. It wasn't just, an MSP system, it was the state system.
Well, the one thing that worried me a lot about the whole radio setup was we spent $30 million on the first phase. We cut you, I think it was $28 million. Mm-hmm. And it had 6 million people. And the UP was going to include 60 towers with 600,000 people for a like amount of money.
Yeah.
And there was talk of a hybrid system, and I wanted no part of it, neither did Chuck, a little band for up there, and we got through all that too. But the other thing, I'll tell you one thing we didn't get that we should have got, what made a difference, is when we were doing the bids, I believe it was for 10% more money per tower, we could increase the tower loading by 50%.
Yeah.
And remember that? And my goal was, if we can do that, then we can have additional antennas, we can have additional stuff on them. Why not have that kind of capacity when, and I couldn't sell it. I just couldn't sell it. And in the end, it might have been better. Otherwise, people would be with their own antennas on the system. But no, there was a lot of, I did more policy in the state police in a week than what executive council did in a year. Mm-hmm. Just no doubt. Just the decisions that we had to make.
We had, I can't remember, I don't remember at phase 2, but I do remember at phase 3 and phase 4, and each of those phases were getting close to being finished, having a big presentation. In phase 3, I remembered it was I think right by the airport, where we did a big presentation for all state and local law enforcement to let them know what that system was going to be like and what its availability was, to go and sell it to them, to get them to come on at that point in time. So I know at phase 3 and phase 4 we were everybody was marketing pretty heavily to get local units of local law enforcement on the system.
Sure. Yeah, and it was all of those efforts, the marketing from the early days when you were there until you retired, that I know that you all, as well as Tom Miller, also stepped in as your replacement and continued those efforts. And we still do those efforts today. And we still have roughly about 5 counties that are utilizing their own existing system. Most all those counties, with the exception of maybe a couple, it's really a financial piece. They need another tower or 2 for coverage. And then, subsequently, the secondary part of that is products, buy the products to utilize. But the desire, for interoperability, that the irony in this is what was started in Michigan, predated the 9/11 incident. It predated, the 9/11 commission reports. So all of the vision that was in place from 1984 to the mid-90s, and what was created, for the most part, the majority of the system was in place prior to the 9/11 incident in New York. That in itself really showed some forethought of what the value of interoperability was from border to border.
Well, even the fleet mapping design that was done on the system originally, and I don't know where it is today, but even that was set up so that you'd have emergency talk groups that were shut off and only came on in a given area when they were activated on the towers that are required to be activated on, when an event, whatever that event might be, required interoperability, so that anybody that was on the system all went to those talk groups so they have immediate interoperability.
Yeah, that same model's in place today.
We did have an event in Michigan that really helped us, and I sold it all the time, which was Flight 255 in Detroit when the airplane went down. It was a Northwest flight. It was 1987. And we lost everybody there on the plane except for one infant.
Yeah.
And we had 18 agencies respond to that crash. The plane actually crashed on I-94, and nobody could talk to each other. And we harped on that particular incident, which is, of course, before 9/11 and everything else. But it was a stark reality in terms of how we couldn't talk to each other, how we couldn't coordinate. And we did that. I had that in a number of my presentations. And in regards to the talk group, it's the only piece of engineering I helped you guys with. Because, the worst thing you can do is you can put like 10 engineers in a room and tell them solve this problem. Because they'll work on it, man. They'll work on it, they'll grind it, they'll work it, it's forever. And after about 3 days, they couldn't come up with a talk group mapping. And I said, you guys, it's really pretty simple. And I went along and I created a spreadsheet. I gave them some I gave them all handouts. I said, I'm in my office all afternoon or this morning, call me. And they called me a couple times. And what they didn't have is they didn't understand the user needs. And I kind of had a clue. I still don't know how to work one of those radios. I never worked one of the radios. But I had a clue how those talk groups would work and how we had to have state police and we had to have local. Each sheriff department had, and the biggest problem was firefighters. They wanted to fight a fire in Erie. And then if someone was on vacation in Ironwood, they wanted to be able to listen to the traffic.
Yeah.
We said, we can't do that. And we can't provide coverage 3 grades below levels during a fire event. That's what your local radios do. But, that was pretty interesting stuff, too.
Yeah, it's the history piece that, I definitely wanted to capture today. So I appreciate all the history that you both gentlemen are providing. Along those lines, who are the key players in designing, building, and bringing the vision to life, and how do those partnerships come together?
I don't know. I think the key was Harry Warner was really he was the thought of all this. And then, as it is with government, everybody gets involved, and then there's always compromises, and then people have different reasons for doing different things. Harry Warner had the vision. Dave held down the fort while we were building it. Buford Goff and Associates, Jack Duncan and Mike Corbett and that whole crew, they were unbelievable in their work during the process. The 100 towers versus 187. I said, I need propagation maps for the 100 towers. And I said, just take a couple county area and do what you got to do. And they came back with Motorola's, provided coverage, and the 100 didn't. And it was an easy decision for it. But we didn't have that kind of expertise in-house.
Right.
So we hired the quality assurance contractor. I don't know what it was, $3.8 million, $4 million initially to do that. And Motorola's expertise, these guys were solving problems all the time. And it was funny the way it went down, because once we decided it had to be turnkey and it had the printer, the printer always came up. There was a guy from Motorola, Marty, who said, when we were doing negotiations, he says, you wouldn't pay us the $28 million because a $200 printer didn't work? I said, only if you were so stupid. And it kind of set the tone. And the printer kept coming up. I never meant it to be a smart-ass remark or anything, but it was kind of the truth. Why wouldn't you make a $200 printer work? And it kept coming up, and Motorola stepped up to the plate, and they kept performing. And that's all we wanted. In the end, he wanted his money. I wanted the first one. It's pretty interesting.
All right, so now we'll kind of move into where some of the examples you provided earlier, it wasn't always smooth sailing. So what were some of the big challenges that both you gentlemen saw during your time with the MPSCS?
Well, there were two big ones. One of them for us was, this first phase had a penalty clause associated with it also. Had a schedule tied to it. And we had a product that wasn't developed yet. We had to get developed in times to implement, get coverage test, functional test, sign off on. And the development engineers in Schaumburg, while they know about that, that isn't forefront necessarily in their mind about the penalty clause, about getting it done on a certain time period. So there was Motorola had a big challenge making sure that we got the product, with Astro 203 was what the first one was, developed in time so that we could get it implemented. That was one of them. But in my mind, the second big challenge, because you brought it up earlier, in every large statewide project, it's sites. Every project that is ever late, somehow it's always tied to sites, getting the sites done, getting approval, getting the sites. So those were two of the big challenges that I thought we had from a Motorola standpoint.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I think during contract negotiations, I think one of the things that both teams did is we ferreted out what could be done and couldn't be done by each team. You guys had the responsibility initially for doing the sites, and I knew you couldn't do it. And I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if we could do it. And we ended up having Mary Levine and two people in addition to that. That's all they did is look for sites. And then I had a meeting with a department head who objected to us using the site. Excuse me. And I had a meeting. He was a director. And so he goes on at this meeting, and I just shoved a memo across his table to him. I said, what about this? He wrote it 4 years ago, supporting the system, saying his people needed it. His signature. He wasn't a director then. And he looks at it, and he says, well, I says, well, we shouldn't be having this conversation at this stage in the game. And he said, okay, but the implications of dealing with department directors and the governor's office, the Speaker of the House, Harry Gast and myself, who was Senate Appropriations, I had all their phone numbers. And I think one of the things that really helped me out is I had contacts with those people earlier in my career as a lobbyist. Some of the things that were coming up would come up quickly, and it seemed insurmountable sometimes, but somehow we got through it. Talking, now there are some people that never got on board, but for the most part we had leadership, and Governor Engler was great. It was his top priority at the time in terms of anything digital was the radio system, because truly it's all digital stuff. And his blessing and his backing was absolutely imperative. Mm-hmm. We had one issue one time. Everybody's worried what the governor's going to do about it. I'm going, we got to ask him. And then we finally got someone to ask him, and he said, what are you guys waiting for? Yeah, go ahead and do it, and that's how it was. But sometimes government works slow. It's the Queen Mary when it comes to turnips. So we did what we could.
We had, even with the sites, when we put the proposal together, there was a list of state-owned property for all the different places you could put towers.
Sure.
Well, we started implementing, or started going through, and a number of those sites were leased sites that they were state-owned, but they weren't state police-owned.
Okay.
They were DNR, and the state was funding it by selling bonds.
Yeah.
The sale of bonds. So because we were going to put this $1 million worth of assets tower on a site, the piece of property had to be part of the state police for a bonding standpoint. You couldn't, in order to sell the bonds, all the assets had to be on state police property.
Okay.
So then there was an issue of getting property transferred from one state agency, getting this 5-acre parcel
Yeah.
transferred from one state agency to the police so that we could say police so that it could be properly the sale of the bonds because the assets now were in control of the state police.
Sure.
And a lot of the property was funded through DNR grants. It could only be used for DNR purposes.
We didn't find all that out
So
after
then
the contract.
we had to make sure that one of the DNR purposes was having a radio tower there to support their DNR functions.
Okay.
And that was a real dicey project for a long time. And that was bonded by the State Building Authority, and there was a lot of people, and then we defunded them. I mean, when they got through with the 187 million, there's not a lot of money left.
Yeah.
And of course, all the universities want money. Everybody's competing for that money. So
Yeah.
that was there was some jeopardy there too.
So that's probably one that I don't remember. At the time when you guys were securing sites, was MSP buying the sites, or was it through SBA, the bonding authority? Were they buying the
Well,
sites?
we were finding the sites, qualifying them,
Okay.
and then MSP bought them.
Okay.
Later on, about 10 years later, there was a lady that I knew at this little country club that I belonged to who was working for DMV in land management. She came up to me one night and she said, "Just how many pieces of land did you buy?" Because I, as a project manager, I had to sign off on it. And I said, we bought a lot of land. We bought a lot of land. Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And you know, other places that I've been to where I've done some consulting work and stuff, I always tell them what Chuck said, it's all about the sites.
Yeah.
If you can get the sites and the towers up, I just wanted my 181 towers, and then we go from there. And obviously you guys you've got another 100 towers or so.
Yeah, those are all local towers, but we run into the same challenge though.
But that was an interesting strategy. I always thought that happened after the project was signed off. That is, when I'll pick one, Genesee County as an example. When a local unit of government had a strong interest in going on the system because of its interoperability, but wanted portable coverage as opposed to the mobile coverage that it was designed for. And then you guys set up the process where they buy the remote sites and whatever incremental upgrades need to be done to the master, and then you'll let them come on the system. I thought that was because in the end, it not only benefited them because they now had use of the entire system, but it gave the state police portable coverage.
Yeah.
In areas, Washington County, I know there are bunches of them, but Genesee County, I remember. So that was a neat strategy, I thought.
Yeah, it was, the proverbial thinking out of the box. How do we continue the partnership? You know, what was in place in the early days, and how do we continue that effort? Fortunately, again, it goes back to, the direction of the legislature of go out and market this, and that became really the catalyst around the marketing piece, because now it became beneficial for everybody. On the surface, many saw exactly that as, well, now the state police takes advantage of this. But it was every other state agency user that was taking advantage of the opportunity in those communities. And we just saw that continue to grow and grow and grow. So primarily most of the counties in Southeast Michigan are all simulcast solutions that add additional coverage for portable and building needs that just expanded the system. It's probably where we have the majority of the additional sites is in Southeast Michigan. We have quite a few now on the western side of the state, but not as many simulcasts as what was there. But, that's what we run into as the challenge in some of those is, what we've heard through the years is communities that, have a need as time when grant dollars have for the most part dried up, is they're looking, for money to build a tower, or asking us if we can build a tower. And many of them weren't around in the early days to realize that we just had one build out and that was it. But the opportunity or that drive is still there on, hey, we could use a tower. And we recently went through this effort, actually in partnership with Motorola. We had some ideas, but it was really what our Motorola peers in each of the regions uncovered. It's like another 23, 24 sites that have an interest around the state. So at the time when we've got 355 towers, I think, and there's still another 25-ish out there that exist. It definitely continues down the same path of what was envisioned in the early days of the 2-mile grid testing, that I'm sure you guys figured out on a napkin someplace how you were going to do that. But it's still done today. When we're signing off a county integration, and really us signing off, it's that county's integration, but we're the pro bono consultants in it to make sure that it's not going to impact existing public safety, and it's going to meet our standards.
Well, you had I do remember parts of it when they were getting ready to do that, saying the state has to have a significant input on those towers, in part because at the end, there is going to be a state police trooper on that, which may affiliate with that site from time to time, and they have a certain expectation as to how that site's going to perform.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that even when it's a state and local unit or a local unit of government, that their sites are operating just as efficiently as yours are when they're running.
Yeah, absolutely. We take it. Spot on, Chuck, because the approach we've taken is every site is the MPSCS.
We talked about that. We talked about that at the very beginning. The equipment needs to be the same so that everybody knows exactly what the expectation is.
Yeah, at a time in the earlier days when you guys were developing the specs around security then was a concrete shelter, a door that it could withstand a 30-6 shell, and a chain link fence. And now security for us includes cameras, plenty of IT security within the network.
Oh, yeah.
But we still have the original physical security that exists out there, but now it's become more enhanced thanks to the changes of the world. But if anyone would have, said back in, 1998, hey, you're going to need to think about some IT security on the system, you had to chuckle at them at the time. I mean, like, what is that? Because even that was really not a forethought back then.
I think historically, to go along with that, you look at your patch. It says Michigan Public Safety Communications System. And I don't remember specifically, except they came to me and they said, well, what's the name of this thing? And I said, what do you mean, what's the name? We got to have a name. And so I said, well, this is what it's got to be because this is where it's going.
Yeah.
And that has been the only name of the system.
So true.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's always been public safety.
And it still is to this day. Oh, I think we chuckled at different times. You could have bought a vowel, so it's easier to kind of.
But the MPSCS is fine. That's what people call it.
Yeah. I'll say, recently to add to this, speaking of the MPSCS, I had the opportunity to sit down with the Chief Operating Officer of Motorola, Jack Malloy, and John Zadar. Both of you may know John as well. I know, Chuck, you know John. John was off camera as Jack and I were having a little fireside chat, and right off the bat, Jack screwed up MPSCS, and John, definitely joked. He's like, "Hey, it rolls off my tongue. I can step and say it." But even to this day, it's surprising how many people I hear they get tripped up on the letters. So going back in time, if we stepped in the DeLorean today, I'd go back and we'd buy a vowel, so it just roll a little bit easier. So, one additional, question back in the early days is, can you give us what it was like working with the counties and cities and first responders in the very early days of the system?
I can give you a couple of things. Okay. This was in Brighton, I think. we were at a meeting. The communication system, this system is significantly more sophisticated operationally from a user standpoint than systems in the past. We finally got to the point where we collectively wouldn't give radios out to people, locals, until they had had a formal training session. We would not give them radios. Because I remember going out, and it was in Brighton, I'm sure it was, where people were complaining that they didn't have coverage. And they would pick a spot where we knew there was coverage, and they would just complain. So we'd go out there, bring an engineer out there, we'd sit down and say, well, show us. And I can't tell you how many times that the problem was operator error, not system performance. That was the problem. And that's when we instituted no training, no radio.
Yeah. And that model still exists today.
There was an article in the Free Press, Detroit Free Press, where it was down in Pinckney, I think. 2 firefighters said this is a horrible system, and they took the reporter out, and they had a radio at one end of the football field and another radio at the other.
That's why I said Brighton.
Yeah, it was Pinckney, and then they said, see, it doesn't work. And they were on 2 different talk shows. And it caused a whole lot of problems. So we responded back to that article. I wrote a letter for the director's signature rebutting every sentence in that article was wrong. And we said the next time this guy does an article, he should talk to us also. And that guy never wrote another article for the Free Press. They never answered the director, but he was done.
Wow.
And but those kind of things. Yeah, it was Pinckney, Michigan.
Yeah, I kept saying Brighton, but that's the same one I remembered as well. So we had that. We had people had other manufacturers' communication systems, and they were converting over. Locals were converting over to the MPSCS system, and of course, they, in some cases, were doing it begrudgingly. So we had a little bit of that to deal with until they realized how it worked. And then after that, there wasn't a problem. This was Jeff's idea. He came on a separate issue. He came up with the idea of, when we did our coverage testing, doing it using a state trooper in every car. So that when we'd go through the coverage test at the end of the day or the end of the week that trooper was in the car, he would have firsthand knowledge of how well the system was performing and its coverage compared to what they currently had, so that word would spread through the rank and file, just as a result of the state trooper who was in the vehicle. If the state trooper was in the vehicle, a MSP tech was in the vehicle, and a Motorola engineer running software was in the vehicle.
It's how many cars may have had to get towed out around the areas that...
Well, I'm going to kind of answer part of that. They were the Crown Vics we were using to start with. But we got to the point where in the coverage testing, we went to the Jeeps afterwards. Yeah. Even those were on the rear-wheel drive. Yeah. We went to the Jeeps. Every vehicle, by the end, had a chainsaw, a come-along, a pick, an axe, and a shovel.
Because you needed them.
Because by the time you got to the phase 3, northern mower, and phase 4, you might be in that vehicle for a half an hour on a 2-track.
Yeah.
And then get stuck. Where you're not getting a record. If you got stuck,
you can't even tell where to go.
It was up to you to get unstuck.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of Crown Vics that went to the shop after a day or two of coverage testing.
Yeah, I think I've heard some of those stories on some of those patrol vehicles that at one point ended up on a snowmobile trail.
Boy, there were many times you can't, when you're doing 2 mile by 2 mile grids, you're not, there are lots and lots of, or you'd go, our next grid is right It's just over there. So there's a 3-foot log across the trail, but trail's just over there. What? Well, you either go back and spend the rest of the day going around and come in from the other side, or you take the chainsaw, cut yourself an opening to keep going.
Yeah.
Well, there'd be ponds. I can't tell you just what I was doing. You'd be a pond. The trail's going down, and then it's a beaver pond. So somebody would get out, walk it to see how deep it was, to see if it was something you could drive through with your Jeep to get to the other side. And if it was, the guy I'd go to the trooper and go, the trooper would sit there, I'd go, it can drive across to get to the other side.
Yeah. Well, I remember the first days, you guys got done early. And I said, you guys got done early. How come you got done so early? And Chuck says, you ever ridden with those guys? Meaning the troopers we had been in the cars, because they just got stuff done.
Yeah.
And they helped out quite a bit. It was a good move to have the union involvement in it.
I think some of the most fun I've ever had working at Motorola was doing the coverage testing. Being in the vehicle, doing the coverage testing. It was just fun days.
You know, I've heard some of the same stories from some of the men and women that were in the patrol vehicles on the MSP side, as those some of the highlights of their career working here. So I think it's on both parts being part of that. So, but it is good. Now, moving on, a question here for you, Jeff. I know you kind of led with it a little bit earlier, work you did with the director, but in your efforts and passion and support of the MPSCS, did you ever find yourself at odds with, MSP leadership or support when you needed to get things done with the legislature, or budget office, or the executive office, the governor? Any advice you'd share?
The only frustration is it didn't happen as fast as it was supposed to. And part of it was we had all this stuff coming out. I mean, the ship never stopped moving forward, but it wasn't as quick as we had wanted. But the leadership within MSP was great. DMB left us to our own devices. We did have someone on DMB that wanted a $500 a year fee for using the radios. And I argued long and hard against that. And initially, I think it was $200 a year was what to have the radio on the MSP system. You had to buy your radio, and then there was $200 a year. But outside of that, I think and it comes from the governor and the director. They all wanted the system. We had to have the system. We had a system of 4258 megahertz. There's 4 frequencies. We had a smattering of towers throughout the state. In my post of Erie, I could be 10 miles away from my tower, and I couldn't call my post, but I could call Ypsilanti. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just crazy.
Right.
And so we knew we needed one. We couldn't put more money into what we had. So it was, we were at the right place at the right time with the right technology being developed to come up with this system, and it worked. And we were grinders. That's all we did. And with all that, what happened is, I think the best part of this thing is the relationship I have with Chuck or Bob Batis or Tom. God bless his soul. He was a great guy. My guy's the same way with many of the people in the Motorola thing. It truly became a private industry government project in the true sense of the word. They did stuff we couldn't do. We had money they couldn't get, basically. I mean, and I just thought it was a great project where it was all done. Mm-hmm. I can't be more proud of what the current staff has done with a very barbaric beginning in many ways. Yes. I mean, people don't realize how we had the towers and we had some users, but man, we were just gaining steam. We were just keep rolling. And there was also an ownership factor at the local level too. Mm-hmm. I want my own radio system. and there was a distrust as to whether or not the state police or the MPSCS could supply the kind of service that we said we could. And those were kind of hard to overcome. But once your 911 directors realized they could have a microphone right here that did everything they needed with very little on their part in terms of capitalization, etc., then the wheels started turning. And the more people that came on the system, the more it proved itself to the people who worked on the system.
Right.
And that's where you guys capitalize.
Right.
And then with a little innovation, being outside the box, towers got to be on our standards, everything works.
So with that around the personnel, a question for both of you. How many people, when you first started, Jeff, how many people did you have in your team? And the same for you, Chuck. How many people did you have in your team when this started?
Well, when this first started, we had it was our communications section. We had telephones, we had radios, we had there was probably a total of 15 people.
Okay, wow.
I mean, it was small.
Listen.
And then once we got rolling, it was myself and Harry, and then Buford Golf did a lot of the work. And then we just started growing. When we had the NCC, we had to hire yourself and 4 other people. Then we had people for the property. When I left, I had probably over 100 people, maybe 115 people on staff. And of course, we had money built into the budget for a 5-year build-out to hire new people.
Right.
And so I didn't have, but there were problems. I look hard to find someone that could draw a wire that was a female. Those people aren't out there. It was really hard to find people that could pull a wire, let alone someone that was, you look to the service.
Yeah.
Service people had people that did that.
Yeah.
And the people with training, like with the Air Force, with Doty and those guys, they were really good with radios. They were way beyond. Of course, the Armed Forces were doing a lot more with communications or this type of thing than we were. But so we ended up with about 115 when I left, something like that. I don't know what Chuck did with his, but I know one meeting we had 4 people at the table, and Motorola brought in 22 people. Them going, what is this? Everybody had a role.
Yeah. The team that did the implementation team, when we first started, there was only 5 people. That was the except. Then we hired Bob Beatus came in, and then we brought in John Burkett to do microwave. We brought in Dave Weatherwax to do training. But at the front end, at the top, we probably had. We had a finance manager and we had the contract, Marty Rogan. Those were ancillary. I mean, they were key. They were ancillary. The project team was about a dozen at the height of it.
Well, so I'd say we probably work with Motorola about similar numbers. Most of them are our sales personnel.
Yeah.
Bob is in more of a business relationship manager role with us, probably very similar to what Tom's role was early on, as pull on the sales, but just focus on the relationship. And I think it's interesting here. There was, of course, I was there back then, so 115 is what I recalled. And you look at that, we had 181 tower sites, I think, at the time, and now we're almost double that. And we haven't added a lot of people, but we could use people.
We had 2 people working towers.
Yeah, we have.
And that was Joe and Therron. And of course, that stuff, you can't do 187 hours with 2 people. So we had to grow.
Yeah.
We had to grow.
With that, it was a thought. Do you recall, this isn't, one of the pin questions, but do you recall a report the University of Michigan did on staffing that would be needed for, a system of this size? Do you recall that?
I remember somebody from the outside did a report, but like most anything else we did, I kind of relied on what Chuck and I decided we needed and what I had to have.
Okay.
I don't remember what was in that report. Do you remember?
No, I don't. But it made me think of that when I was asking you
I
as council.
remember they did something.
Yeah, 'cause I know it was considerably more than the 115 that we had on staff.
But that's that way in education, period.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It was just interesting. But it, for the staff that are listening, from 15 and 2 tower crew guys to now there's 5 teams of the tower crew and a supervisor over each team and a manager that manages that entire team. So you're entirely right. Add more, you have to grow, and that's what we have to do.
Well, that's the big asset. The top of the sites are that's a big asset to make sure you want to take care of, because that lasts a long time.
Yeah, and we need it to last a long time. We have 30 years in, so we need it to last.
well,
another
they were
30
They were
years.
supposed to be 50-year towers when we built them.
Mhm.
And I know you've replaced a couple of them, it seems to me. Hastings?
Just one.
Hastings?
Yeah, just
Is that the
Hastings,
Hastings
yep.
one? And but not only do you have more towers, but the 2 guys that are working the tower, you check the guy wires and you got 4 frequencies on the tower. How hard is that? No microwave radios, nothing. The complexity in the tower and in the generators, all that stuff is all brand new stuff. It was
Battery backup.
yeah, it was really big stuff. And there's a lot more to do on the towers. So I can see that easily.
Yeah, actually, I stand corrected. You're right. We did have 2. One in Hastings, which was just recent, but the other was actually in Macomb, as the county added a tower adjacent to ours. We didn't need the tower, so we dismantled it and moved it to another location.
Okay.
So, but you're right, Stan. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have paid attention well through the year. We did move too.
From a distance.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Good.